So good evening, everybody from India. Welcome to the CUTS webinar, and first of all, very happy World Competition Day to you all. And I see people are joining, so I'll just take a minute to people to join. So please be online.
Bangladesh Competition Commission is online, APE is online. Yeah, Bangladesh.
Just waiting for a few people to join. People are joining, so just give us a minute. Hello, everybody. Just waiting for a couple of minutes to people to join. I already see some people have joined, but expect some more people. So let's start. Good evening, everybody from India, and namaste, because it may not be evening in many parts of the world. I see people from Caribbean, Bangladesh, and African countries, Ghana, have joined us. So and a happy World Competition Day to all. This is the 5th December, and this webinar is to celebrate the World Competition Day. This year's theme is ensuring effective competition in an increasing online world. World Competition Day has been we celebrate on 5th December, because on this day the United Nations General Assembly had formally adopted what is called as the UN multilateral principles and UN set of multilateral principles and rules for the control of restrictive business practices. Uh, and this was adopted on 5th December 1980. Uh, we celebrate World Competition Day so that consumers around the world are aware of the competition issues, because in the market economy, competition is the best friend for consumers. And we also create awareness regarding the role played by consumers in shaping the effective competition regime. And CUTS has been spearheading this campaign since 2010, when we celebrated first World Competition Day. Uh, uh, we thank UNCTAD for all around support for us for this campaign. So you can say that this is a CUTS and UNCTAD joint effort that we do. And in last 10 years, the fruits are like that. Around 70 countries around the world are now celebrating World Competition Day, and most of them include the competition authorities of those countries. Uh, and one milestone that can be flagged is that the Philippines government, in fact, adopted 5th December as its National Competition Day. Uh, so, to commemorate this day, we thought to kind of get the theme of this year's on online economy, ensuring consumer awareness. We thought that it would be good to introduce to the world. I mean, people might have read and heard about this, but we should discuss about the digital markets and competition law review uh, committee, which was set up in India, has released its report in August. And there are certain recommendations. People are generally aware about the developed world, what they are doing, but not much from developing countries come. And there are a lot from one another to learn from. So the scheme of thing would be like I will be presenting for around 20-25 minutes, and then you all can text your queries. We will have half an hour of discussion, so let's make it interactive as such. uh, Let me begin with the Competition Law Review Committee, which was set up in October 2018, last year. And the TOR was like to review the Competition Act or the rules or the regulation in view of the changing business environment, and recommend necessary changes if required. It was also mandated to look into the best international practices in the competition field and merger guidelines, and also to kind of study other regulatory regimes and institutional mechanism in India, what we can learn from other regulatory good practices to be incorporated in the competition regime. And there was open-ended that any other matters related to competition issues can be considered by the committee. Uh, we at CUTS, in fact, submitted a very detailed uh, memorandum on this, and our approach was like our premise of submission was uh, following the global debate on this, which we learned that there is growing concentration in the world, uh, and in the digital economy, this gets aggravated, and it's leading into in inequality in the economy. There are job losses, uh, and it is being found that competition enforcement, kind of is not doing much to tackle all these, and some sort of erosion of public trust in competition authorities. So we thought to get this on board to the Competition Law Review Committee, that if you are reviewing this law, then you should have a broader picture in your mind of the economy, because the Indian competition law, the object clause, wants Competition Authority to keep a view of economic development. The word used is economic development and the not growth. Development has a wider connotation than the growth, as we know, because development includes elements of equity in it. So in this scenario, we were submitting to the committee, and we thought that the competition law itself may not be able to kind of uh, tackle to the many of the competition concerns that come from the digitalization of economy, including economic concentration. So there would be need for a national competition policy to be adopted, and the law can reflect upon that. However, the committee did not kind of accepted this, but they had certain governance structure change in the competition institution authority, but we feel that they might not be effective. We also raised the matter of how do we construe the consumer welfare, the big debate that is happening in particular in the US and all, and we recommended to have a total welfare approach so that respectability is revived to the competition regime. However, that was also not reflected in the competition law review committee report. We also suggested on market power dominance assessment, which were largely accepted by the which I'll talk later on. Some of the our inputs on combination, the mergers and acquisition, particularly the threshold level on threshold level, were also accepted by the commission. We also suggested some algorithm collusion regarding that has also been addressed. We also suggested on settlement and commitment, which we thought that it may be important to be introduced in competition law. We do not have in legal text at this moment of time, though there is a residual power under Competition Act, and High Court have ruled that such settlement and commitments can be read into those. But the committee, in fact, also accepted this, and they have reflected it in their report. We also suggested on overlap conflict between sectoral regulators and CCI, which may be important in digital economy because you have data regulator, telecom regulators, and other regulators. So that conflict may also. However, I'm not going to talk on this issue in this. We also talked about enhancement of competition advocacy functions, because enforcement is of the dispute, but advocacy is also necessary for kind of correct the things that can come in the future. A stitch in time saves nine kind of approach, so that the authority do a study and then identify advocacy agenda and then suggest to the government that, look, government, if you do this or if you do not do this, then there will be such a pro-competition effect, there can be anti-competition effect. So such kind of role is becoming much more important in digital economy. You can find our submission on that link that I had given. The report of the Competition Law Committee, which is the core of this presentation, is basically a very detailed report, and a chapter is included on devoted on technology and new age market, which in fact is looked upon from the angle that whether the current act is ready to address issues of the digital market that can arise or that is already arising. It makes a statement that this that characterized by a strong economies of scale and scope, network effects, and multi-sided markets, digital markets present unique opportunities as well as challenges to policymakers. So this is the premise under which the committee has looked into this market, suggested on the changes that may be required, or the approach of the authority in interpretation of the law that may be required. The committee also find that most jurisprudence on digital economy in antitrust is still evolving. So some sort of a kind of careful approach it has taken. Like kind of you need more research, or you need more market studies to make kind of recommendations on that. So coming to the core of the digital markets, and what are the Commission Law Review Committee's recommendations. It has identified data as key in the digital market, and the control of data. In fact, the incumbents in the digital market can amass a big amount of data, which can have give them further advantage to that. And in that reference, the first point that comes in is that uh, any digital services that consumers are receiving are largely free in nature. Then whether they have locus standi, because it is free, so whatever is given to you free, you may not be consumer, or you may not there should be a consideration between you, so there may not be so in that sense, the committee has recommended that the definition of price includes non-monetary considerations. Our definition of price has a phrase called every valuable consideration, whether direct or indirect. So it said that there is no amendment required, and it has recognized that the platforms, or the which gives services free, takes personal data from consumers, and those personal data, and after processing them, they monetize them from the advertisements and other services, or from the business side suppliers. So in that sense, even if it's no price consideration, it is a price within the meaning of the Competition Act of India. It also suggested, in fact, that if to make the digital market competitive, personal data mobility, or data probability, or systems of open standards will increase the interoperability, and hence will increase the competition in the market. However, it has not recommended, because these are the domain of beyond competition law enforcement, but it has flagged that these kind of thing can happen. So in a whole of government approach, or the competition policy approach, these issues can be flagged, that in fact in India, we are going to have a new data protection law, and in the draft we see that there are provisions on data probability, portability, and interoperability. On algorithm collusion, the committee delved into, and found that the existing law is sufficient to deal with the even if there is no human intervention. The sufficient law, the existing law can kind of deal with algorithm collusion. However, in certain cases, it felt that the evidence is not yet clear, or let more evidence come, so that one can kind of recommend further changes into law, or approach. So it was a kind of a guarded approach by the committee to wait for, but it has suggested a continued monitoring of the use of machine learning and AI in the sense, and then learn, and then intervene, which kind of a good approach, that instead of a knee-jerk kind of intervention, one can kind of learn and then intervene, and which has been the approach of the competition authority in India also. However, we feel that committee could have deliberated upon at least the shifting of burden of proof, because the algorithm collusion investigation requires loss of resources and uh, take mind in that. So many competition authority may not have that. I'm not sure whether India can also have that resources at this moment of time. So after a prima facie case, if the burden of proof is shifted on the colluding party or the alleged colluding party, then we can save lots of resources and can get a better result of that. And uh, uh, compliance by design can also be, kind of should have been recommended, and it should also have recommended better cooperation between authorities, international cooperation, because digital markets are generally now a global market. So not one country is facing this problem, but many countries are facing the same kind of or similar kind of problem. So if a country is able to crack that, it would be good that such information is shared with others, and algorithmic collusion is one such area where cooperation would be much more required. Uh, there was deliberations on vertical restraints also in digital world. Particularly, platform can exercise restraint on its business suppliers side in that sense. Uh, so particularly the most favored nation clause was studied or deliberated upon by the committee, uh, and it suggested that the present law is, wide enough to deal with that. Uh, it also deliberated upon what is called as a conglomerate effect. In fact, the existing provision of the Competition Act is such that the such restraints are dealt under what is called as anti-competitive agreements. Uh, so it deals with horizontal agreements, or the agreements of the entities providing same or similar products, and the vertical agreements where the two parties are at different levels of this supply chain. So committee wanted to widen the ambit of law and suggested amendment so that to include what is called as other agreements, so that in future the if there are conglomerate arrangements which may not fall between horizontal or the vertical arrangements, that can be frowned upon, or that can be dealt within the act. So this was one of the suggestion which can fall into what is called as the digital antitrust. Uh, in dominance and market power, as I said earlier, that what we had suggested, that there may be a situation where a big firm can control a lot of data, and then because of network effects or feedback loops, it may be very difficult for new entry, new player to enter into market. Uh, I'm saying here to enter into market here is uh, uh, not just entering but to sustaining. I mean, unless a new entrant in the market, in the digital market, uh, attains a critical mass of network effect, it will be hard for that entity to sustain in the market. And that's why we find that in most segments you have hardly 2 to 3 platforms or the entities working, and others are largely kind of suffering, and this is what is called as a winner takes most effect in that. So we had suggested even that committee to look to talk about the collective dominance. However, committee did not negated that. I mean, took cognizance that yes, but in fact negated that. They also recognize that there can be a attempt to monopolize even by non-dominant firms. And in that case, it suggested that we should study further, that we must study the Indian digital market and develop deeper insights. Only then we should suggest solutions in that. Uh, what the most important thing that the committee suggested, that the existing act may not be amended for this purpose, but uh, the present provisions can be read. In these present provisions, you can very well include the concept of control over data and specialized assets, which can be used for a factor for determining dominant position. We have a provision where there are list of items to be taken into account in determination of market power or dominant player. Uh, and one of them is resources of enterprise, and within these resources of enterprise, uh, this control over data or network effects or anything can be kind of read into that. So the onus lies on now the authority to use these concepts into their analysis while determining the market power, uh, because most of the uh, 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 cases have been kind of rejected just because the 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 alleged entity has found to be not dominant in the market. So once it's not dominant, the abuse part does not arise. So the abuse of dominance doesn't arise. In mergers and acquisitions, and the India presently has that threshold. Threshold is based on asset and turnover. Uh, Committee recognized that the asset light digital markets can generate significant revenue for some years, allowing certain deals to escape scrutiny. It has also given examples of certain, such for example, Facebook acquiring WhatsApp was not kind of uh, scrutinized in India or in many other jurisdictions. It was not inquired because it fell outside the threshold level. Uh, the turnover of was not much, or the asset light digital entities are asset light. So it has it take cognizance of the fact that such transaction may lessen future competition, even if they do not have any immediate impact. So there was a dynamism also introduced in could be introduced in analysis. In that sense, the committee recommend, and this is one of the very important recommendation, is to have a new threshold based on size of the transaction or deal value, and for this the law has to be amended. However, the committee also has suggested, and which already has been notified, a green channel for mergers and acquisition, where you just say that my kind of this merger is not going to have, but subsequently if you find that you were deposing wrongly, then you will be fined heavily. So it would be interesting to see if deal value is accepted by the government and law is amended, and the green channel, how they can coexist together. It would be interesting to see. uh, Let me also come to another item which I'll be dealing very briefly, that is settlement and commitments. Our law do not have settlements and commitment provisions so far. However, it has a residual power for competition authority to uh, anything can in the interest of the objective that has been given to it. Uh, One of the court judgment has suggested that residual power can, under that residual power, competition authority can settle the matter, but there was loss of conditions attached to that. So the committee has suggested to introduce expressively in the act, to amend the act and introduce settlement and commitments clauses. Uh, the reasons for has been attributed that their long cumbersome process followed by the commission, and it's a very time taking matter, and commission can also uh, use its scant resources in something else rather than dealing in a case in a very lengthy manner. However, the is not as sweeping as in many other jurisdictions, uh, because the settlement mechanism is for the cases of vertical anti-competitive agreements and abuse of dominance. So the cartel is out of the settlement mechanism in this. Uh, the committee has also suggested that you have to make other subordinate legislation, like you have to change rules of the act, and then also have to introduce certain guidelines to clarify, because it is a sub regime in itself. Uh, it has also distinguished between settlement and commitments in as some other jurisdiction like UK and all. Uh, we feel that it has some departure from the international best practices and should have included the cartel. Like the cartel has been excluded, the scope is limited, uh, and the derivation should have kind of given the percentage of fine and reduction. Uh, this is the slide that says about settlement mechanism in other jurisdiction, but they have not taken into account for this Indian law. So I think it's 7:32 now, and this is my last slide. And after this, we'll be open for question and answer. So you may like to formulate your questions and text to us. Uh, so the way forward, what could be the way forward? I think first task would be to for civil society or the organization like CUTS, or to kind of ensure legislative changes as per the recommendation of the committee. For example, whether government will accept deal value threshold for MNS or not. There are other suggestions as well, whether the government will accept or not. So we have to advocate for such acceptance to the government. Then we have to see that the competition authority, the commission of India, takes into account the concept that have been clarified by the CLRC to be read into the existing provisions. Whether Commission Authority is taking such concepts into its analysis or not. So, for example, the control of data or the network effect as an elements in determining the dominance or the market part, whether the Commission Authority is taking that into not, because it's already in the law. Since law is wide, may not be expressly in such words, but it can be read into. Then we feel that we have to keep advocating for the adoption of national consumption policy, because digital economy aspect, and we cannot rely only on ex facto ex post case by case basis of the consumption enforcement, which is important in its place with more, but ex ante approach in dealing with digital market consumption concern is equally important, or perhaps more important at this moment of time, to understand and approach. So in that sense, competition policy is a larger umbrella under which competition enforcement is a subset. Uh, for example, a platform to business regulation can, kind of help in lots of concerns which arise due to adoption of dual role of platform, where platform neutrality is kind of compromised, and the business side, the supplier side, suffers most because of that. Uh, in fact, uh, for the platform services, the supplier side is also consumer for the platform services. So in that sense, the the uh, circumference of consumer is not just the user side, it's the supplier side also are the consumers of uh, those platforms. So we also need to facilitate more market studies as suggested by committee also in digital market and identify competition advocacy agenda. Recently, Competition Commission of India has released interim observations on its market study on e-commerce, which has identified certain concerns in e-commerce sector, and we have also given our detailed inputs for that. So that can be for the other time, and of course consumer awareness always time, because digital economy, one of the area is one of the uh, pillar is consumer trust, and since digital economy in itself is good for consumers, in fact we have been gaining a lot from this. So the minimizing the risk and maximizing the gain, and what are the duty for us on this towards digital economy to keep the competition happen. For example, if there are data portability provisions, then whether consumers are aware of whether to get their data from one platform to other platform to third or fourth platforms, so that all are competitive enough in the market. So I'll like to end here, and would like to hear from all of you any questions and answer on that. Let me check and I will respond. So there is one question from Uday, which says, given that ACCC came out with a detailed report covering competition and digital economy, how much has the report influenced the CLRC committee? In fact, if the CLRC report is read, I mean, it has particularly read reports of quoted reports from Germany, UK, and perhaps Australia also. So the studies of the developed jurisdictions have kind of impressed upon the committee. Perhaps it has enhanced their insights on the digital market, and then they Indianized, connected it with the Indian regime, and so I think the market studies from around the world has particularly been handy for the committee to give their recommendations. Uh, then there is a question from uh, Madam Tamun Stewart. Good evening, Madam. The presenter stated that law is sufficient to cover human intervention. This was I think your uh, intervention was regarding the algorithm collusion. Uh, the law is sufficient to cover, according to the committee, even if there are no human intervention. However, uh, uh, committee wanted that we should develop more insight about whether what is the mechanism of machine to machine learning and machine to machine collusion and AI. Uh, but as far as now, whatever evidence that says is it says that the present law of India is sufficient to deal with that. But it is aware of the fact that there may be a situation where law may not be enough. So, but they would like to have evidence first and then intervene. That was the approach, I think. From then we have a question from Muhammad Khalid Abu Nasser Saab. What about data localization and consumer privacy in digital market. Uh, Consumer privacy is uh, in itself a standalone subject, and there is another regime for that, or upcoming regime for that. And particularly important, consumer privacy protection and data protection is important to engender uh, consumers' trust in the online economy. And data localization and privacy uh, is an issue which our position, our cuts research shows that localization need not necessarily result into more privacy in that sense, or even security in that sense. So what countries are basically doing, particularly those countries which has large user base and which can generate lots of data, uh, they are seeing that by they are they feel that or they think that by adopting data localization they will be able to build a digital ecosystem so that they can garner more value of the digital economy. There are studies, particularly the UNCTAD studies, has suggested that around 90% of value generated in digital economy goes only to two countries, US and China. And so not only digital divide, but something else is needed to fill up so that the you have more and more value. And in this here, since the data is important, so perhaps countries are uh, 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 taking up this what we feel is as a protectionist measure, and we feel that data localization is not pro competition at all, because it will reduce competition, but at the same time it may help or may not help. That depends on how it's being adopted. It's seen to be believed China has done it successfully, but I'm not sure whether many other countries can do that. uh, whether data localization results in kind of creating national champions, so that that national champion is globally competitive. And if you have a national globally competitive champion, then there are chances that the value created in the digital economy globally, you will corner more of it, you will have a larger pie of it. So in that sense, I see data localization and consumer privacy. Then GR Bhatia Sahab, good evening. He is asking that is it that in any jurisdiction in recent past it is held that online and offline are different market? Uh, yes, sir. It is. In fact, in India, I mean, if you see the recent judgment on all in India Online Vendors Association versus Flipkart, uh, and the most recent related with the Make My Trip and Go Ibubo judgment, where it has ordered in-depth inquiry. The Competition Commission is now taking that, since it is a multi-sided market or two-sided market, then the side of the consumer will determine the relevant market. So since initially the e-commerce, we have seen that offline and online were both taken as in one relevant market, and online was just seen as a different distribution channel of the same market. But now there are difference is being made between online and offline market, relevant markets. In fact, in buyer acquiring Monsanto, there there were different markets where relevant markets were determined in which competition assessment was. One of them was digital platform. by these mega firms that gives farmers the solution, the platforms for farmer solution, where you have weather data and seed data, fertilizer data, things like that, uh, crop data, and on that platform itself you can have buyers of the agriculture produce. So if you read the order by the CCI, which kind of made a buyer commit on conditions before allowing that acquisition. Few of the conditions are that the buyer would have to kind of grant access to the weather data uh, to any other entity, that Indian entity that demands that on frank terms, fair, reasonable, and uh, non-descriptive terms. So in that sense, the concept of kind of data or digital platform, kind of is somehow coming as an utility, as an utility now. And so and, uh, very 2 days back we had a biennial where J. Panda, who had introduced data privacy and protection bill in as an individual in 2017, argued that uh, data, that one has to distinguish between big platforms and small startups. Uh, Big tech companies or platforms can now be treated as utility rather than a market entity or market player. So if you treat it as a utility, then certain concepts changes. We have again from Abu Nasser Sahab, US and China have around 90% market share. So can we say it is per se anti-competitive, or they are able to abuse the dominant position? Uh, I'll come to that later on. Then we have Miss Kalyani Pandya. Uh, this is a broad question, but do you think the current legislation of Competition Act 2002 is sufficient or broad with the changing times, especially in the digital era? Uh, I think uh, more than law, I think we require whole of government approach. As we are talking about data here, and we are talking about uh, uh, the in digital economy, the area is very wide. You have telecom, you have uh, uh, postal, you have uh, digital. So you have various sectors combining together, converging together. So you have lots of regulators having their own role. Some of them have ex ante role, and to have course correction or to have certain things so that market remains competitive. Those are very important in digital era. We should not rely only on competition enforcement. Relying only on competition enforcement uh, may lead us to kind of may disappoint us in digital era. That's my however, I'm agreeing with lots of suggestion by the competition law authority that many of the provisions are broad enough to include many of the concepts that I had talked about. If that is kind of adopted by the commission in their interpretations, that would be really good. Then that could yield some good result. But I still feel that we need a broader approach, a national competition policy approach to deal with nuances of digital era. Uh, we have a question from Mr. Matthews. CLRC recommended to include supply side substitute to be given important while determining limit. How does it affect digital markets in your opinion? This is very important. In fact, uh, so far the act recognized only demand side. However, the commission has been taking supply side substitution as well in its in its determination of relevant market. But clarifying this would be good to, kind of, because we have now a multi-sided market, and so that would be important in determining in relevant market. We, if I'm missing any question, you can repost it, please. I agree. Whole of government approach. Moreover, competition authority may consult with expert. Yes, yes, yes. Nasir Saab, the competition advocacy role is very important, and that connects the whole of government approach with the ex ante approach. A competition authority should be, or its staffs, the regime should be wise enough to identify the market that is dealing what is happening, and what can be done by the law. So it should not keep its mandate very, kind of uh, narrow mandate of just I have to apply this in this dispute, and then I'll solve this dispute, and that's over. No, you are know this market. Now, having read and known this market, you understand if there are regulations, or the provisions of the other regulations, or the policy which hinders the competitive process in the market. It's the duty of the authority to let the government know, let the regulator know, let the public know that if such provision is removed, market would be more competitive. Or if you introduce certain provisions, market would be more competitive. The objective should be the competitiveness, or the competitive pressure in the market should be very competitive. Whether it happens just because of competition law enforcement, I doubt. So the mandate of the authority is to maintain competitive force in the market, and that mandate need not necessarily come from the enforcement alone. And I agree with what Nasir Sahab has said. Uh, we have a colleague. Has Cuts undertaken any relevant study in the area competition and digital economy with a specific focus on relevant issues? Yes, we have, and we are going to release our studies soon. We have done a primary study in the NCR region, what is National Capital Region. It constitutes of Delhi and some portions of adjoining states. And in past, the relevant market was determined by in a case by the authority, the Competition Commission of India, as NCR as not being a single relevant market. But our finding are that it can be a single relevant market, except Sonepat. So Gurgaon, Noida, and Ghaziabad and Delhi can form a relevant market in that sense. So any more question? I'll wait for 5 minutes. Yes, I agree with Nasir Saab that both ex ante and ex post approach is relevant in this situation. Madam Tamun Stewart is asking, does India's law allow for investigating firms outside of the jurisdiction? Yes, India has extraterritorial jurisdiction. But how we will do it, that is another session. But we do have extraterritorial jurisdiction in our law. How will big firm in US and EU be investigated? I think we have to cooperate with EU authority or the US authority if we have to. But there are now political economic dynamics in all the things, and not only political economic dynamics, now geopolitical dynamics is coming into digital sector. If you see the US-China trade war. Then there is a kind of war that determines that who will control future of the digital economy, because China is also now very powerful in the sense of holding of the patents of the 5G, loss of patents of the 5G ecosystem. So tomorrow, when 5G and Internet of Things start, uh, who will have this more value in their country, and that is why big countries like Russia and India are, kind of having that data localization approach. Does your commission have a cooperation agreement with EU Commission? I feel so, but I'll get back to you. Confirm. I'll confirm it and I'll email you for that. But I think we have that. We certainly have a BRICS forum. I must mention that there is a very strong BRICS forum that is developing now, and then we have that released a good digital era antitrust from BRICS viewpoint on a very voluminous study. So first version we amended, but we have released that. I will send you, if you like, we can send you the link for that study. That's lots of uh, stuff to study upon. We have also, kind of taken the blockchain and the IoT ecosystem that can come, and we have anticipated what can happen in that. I'll do that. Yes, we have cooperation agreement with the EU. A colleague of mine has confirmed, Mr. Tam. Bangladesh have extradition also. Thank you for informing us. But I think a regional approach would be needed, perhaps, in this, and like CARICOM or COMESA, or if the Southern Asian Competition Authority can also cooperate, they can learn, because there are similarities of market within that. I mean, most of the players first go to the regional countries rather than jump to other developed countries. So lots of domestic forms of the regional countries can scale up their scaling up is very important for new startup or new platform to sustain in the market. To scale up, regional approach can be a better approach for them. I think let's wind up now. We have 1.5 minutes left. So can we? I hope you have found it useful from a civil society perspective. Yes, no regional approach in Asia. I think ASEAN countries have regional platforms. They have regional platforms. They are scaling, some of the Indonesian, some of the Singapore. They are using their own region to kind of scale up and become competitive globally. Yeah, South Asia. I mean, there are problems. Regional approach is dependent on the power of the Commission, and as yet, COMESA and CARICOM competition commission isn't strong enough. That I can understand. And very 2 days back, I met COMESA CEO, Mr. George Lepimile. In fact, they inform us that there is no capacity on digital economy dealing with as